G'day and welcome to the Paul Wallace channel. We're in the Australian Capital Territory. In 1969, from here, Australia played a vital role in the Apollo 11 moon landing. From dishes here in the ACT and in Parkes, New South Wales, vital communications were relayed from the lunar orbiter, the Columbia, carrying astronaut Michael Collins, and mission control in Houston, Texas. From this dish here in Tidbinbilla, just outside Canberra, the communications were relayed between Houston at Mission Control and the Eagle, the lunar landing module, carrying Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon. It was an incredible moment, and I can remember as a young boy gathering with half the world's population as we crowded around radios and TV sets to experience together this incredible moment in human history. Of course, there were strict security protocols around what the astronauts were allowed and not allowed to communicate on the public line. Code words had been agreed in advance to cover any eventualities that the astronauts might encounter that they might not want broadcast to the general public. Questions remain to this day as to what might or might not have been broadcast on a secret medical channel to Mission Control. And there is controversy around the authenticity of the television film footage to which we were all treated in 1969. Was it authentic live television footage of the first ever landing on the moon? Or was it all filmed by Stanley Kubrick? From the painful press conference of 1969 following the first moon landing until the 25th anniversary speech given by Neil Armstrong, in which he made those cryptic remarks about the next generation needing to peel back truth's protective layers. It seems that there are strong controls around what the astronauts are allowed to say. Everyone involved in those missions, ground crew and astronauts in the Mercury and Apollo programs, would have been bound by layers on layers of official secrets laws. The least we can say is that we know there's plenty they were not allowed to say. And when you realize that, it makes all the more significant what the astronauts actually did say. There's a place for speculation, and there's certainly a place for asking questions. But rather than do that, I want to focus on what two of the Apollo astronauts actually have said. Although NASA has never spoken officially on UFO or ET contact, a number of prominent astronauts have. This number includes Mercury astronauts Gordon Cooper, Doug Slayton, and Scott Carpenter, Apollo astronauts Eugene Cernan, Brian O'Leary, Buzz Aldrin, Ed Mitchell, and Al Worden. When Neil Armstrong, Michael Collins, and Buzz Aldrin rocketed their way to the moon in 1969, the world held its breath. Meanwhile, astronaut Buzz Aldrin was trying to work out exactly what was tracking them. Lights were moving in parallel with them, and the crew was unable to identify them. Aldrin said, "I saw this illumination that was moving with respect to the stars. We were smart enough not to say, 'Houston, there's a light out there that's following us.' So technically, it becomes an unidentified flying object." Ever so subtly, Neil Armstrong alerted Houston to their question, tactfully asking Mission Control to identify the location of the third stage of the Saturn V rocket that had got them out of Earth's orbit. It was their signal that they were indeed being tracked by an unidentified flying object in space. When Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong walked on the moon, some were waiting to see if the astronauts would find a monolith on the moon's surface
like in Stanley Kubrick's motion picture 2001: A Space Odyssey? Would they see something not natural, something like a monolith, put there by an ancient intelligence? Buzz Aldrin's public answer has always been no. But 40 years after the mission, Buzz felt free to elaborate. He said, "We should visit the moon of Mars. There is a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once in 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, 'Who put that there? Who put that there?'"
And that's what he is allowed to say. In my book, Escaping from Eden, I argue that our ET contact is something very, very ancient. In fact, it goes to our origins as a species. And I argue that in the text of Genesis, and certainly in the Sumerian and other ancient Mesopotamian texts, we have accounts that are really all about our ancestors' prehistoric contact with ET species. Now, if you want an Apollo astronaut to speak to that, Colonel Al Worden is your man.
Colonel Al Worden is a tough, no BS Apollo astronaut. He piloted Apollo 15 on its mission to the moon in 1971. While his crewmates conducted experiments on the moon's surface and tried out the new moon rover, Colonel Worden orbited the moon a full 75 times. Appearing on the UK's Good Morning Britain in 2017, he was asked if he believed in extraterrestrials. The colonel said, "You know, I've been asked that question hundreds of times. Do you believe in aliens?" And I say, yeah. They ask, "Have you ever seen one?" I say, yeah, I look in the mirror every morning, because that's what we are. We are the aliens. We are the ones who came here from somewhere else, because somebody else had to survive, and they got in a little spaceship and came here. That's what I believe. And if you don't believe me, go get books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they had to say about it. They'll tell you right up front.
And that's what he's allowed to say. For me, one of the bravest and boldest of our Apollo astronauts is the late Ed Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, and a more courageous, honest man of integrity you could hardly wish to find. Ed Mitchell became a courageous spokesperson for declassification of America's UFO files and disclosure of ET contact and ET technology. He became an advocate for his townspeople of Roswell in New Mexico, and his desire was to honor those who he called the old-timers, the witnesses of the Roswell crash and the families of the witnesses. They testified to the crash, retrieval of technology, and of bodies, and those families were silenced by gag orders from the US military, gag orders on them and their descendants through the generations. Ed Mitchell wanted to honor them after they had sought him out, and he was desperate to see humanity benefit from the technology that he believed our ET contact has made available to us.
On May 9th, 2001, more than 60 military, government, corporate, civil aviation and scientific witnesses gathered at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. to present on their personal knowledge of ET contact and ET-related technologies. Dr. Ed Mitchell was one of those who presented at this important event. In his presentation, Dr. Mitchell had this to say: "Some of the people in the area who'd been involved, what I call the old-timers, who were involved in the 1940s, in 1947 with the Roswell crash, people like in the Sheriff's Department who'd been to the crash site and were supervising traffic, My friend and the friend of our family, the major who was in an administrative function at the Walker Air Base. These folks, because they had been shushed and told not to talk about their experience by military authority in those days, and on dire consequences if they did, felt that now, in the 1970s, many, many years later, that they didn't want to go to the grave with their story. They wanted to tell someone reliable. And being a local boy and having been to the moon, they considered me reliable enough to whisper in my ear their particular story and their association with the Roswell crash. I urge that those who are doubtful read the books, read the law, and start to understand what has really been going on, because there is no doubt we are being visited. And as a person who is part of the first generation of our being a spacefaring civilization and having gone to the moon, we had wondered, are we alone in this universe forever? Only in our period do we really have evidence. No, we are not alone. We are just one planet with intelligent life on it. And probably it is time, now that we are spacefarers on our planet, that we get active, because we're really universal beings. What I am suggesting is that it is now time to put away this embargo of truth about the alien presence, and I call upon our government to open up like other governments have, and become a part of this planetary community that is trying to take our proper role as a spacefaring civilization. In a 2009 interview, Ed Mitchell said, "Officially, NASA knows nothing about UFO phenomena because that's not their mission. But I do understand from some of the shuttle astronauts that there have been some incidents. I'm not versed in those incidents. It is my hope that we open this whole issue up. As I've said frequently, we're at a point where we have to become part of a neighborhood of inhabited planets, which we have not acknowledged that that neighborhood exists up until this point."
And that is what he was allowed to say. In the United States of America, the policy of silence that Ed Mitchell wanted to see shifted ran from 1947, from the day after the incident at Roswell, New Mexico, and it ran for 72 years until 2019. Before Roswell, American defense engaged with UFOs in the glare of public attention, and they would go to the press and they would say things like, "We are engaging with UFOs, we are pursuing them, we don't know what they are, we will find out, we will let you know when we found out what they are." And then something changed, and we went to this policy of silence and debunking and gag orders and death threats. So what changed? Logic suggests to me that before the change, we didn't know what they were, we were pursuing them, we would apprehend them, and then we found out, but we didn't want to talk about it. That was the view of Ed Mitchell, given all the information that he was privy to, and he was allowed to say that that was his view. Now, that policy of silence ran until 2019, when all of a sudden, seemingly from out of the blue, the US Navy began admitting that they have indeed been engaging with UFOs and they don't know what they are. The USS Nimitz famously encountered tic-tac-shaped craft, and we heard from official spokespeople and from the pilots involved about what happened in that incident. But it's a very significant policy change, because we've gone back to the policy as it was before 1947, to saying we are engaging, they are real, we don't know what they are. The fact that official personnel are able to speak on behalf of government agencies without being disendorsed, debunked, fired, gagged, death threatened, or even worse, suggests to me that we may now be in a period of soft disclosure, and that different voices from different authorities are drip feeding us information. And as we move further into the 21st century, that drip is becoming a steady stream. In Escaping from Eden, I talk about a body that is described in the Bible, and you can certainly find it in the ancient texts of the Hebrew Scriptures. It's there in the Sumerian narratives, the Mesoamerican, Greek, Indian, African. Narrators from all around the world speak about this body that we can call the Sky Council. It appears to be an uneasy alliance of extraterrestrial species who are gathered around planet Earth with some kind of a stakeholding in it. It's there in our ancient mythologies, there in the narratives of our ancient ancestors. I wonder how much has changed in the time since.
In 2011, a very public spat blew up between US and British governments over US demands for the extradition of a computer hacker, Gary McKinnon. McKinnon had evinced data, images and text from NASA computers, which indicated ET technology, contact and collaboration. He had seen images of an ET craft and a list of names of ET officers. The matter was discussed publicly in Parliament, and the British government responded with a refusal to extradite Gary McKinnon to the USA, where he faced a potential 60 years in jail. In fact, Britain quickly passed a bill through Parliament which changed the UK's extradition laws with the USA in order to protect Gary McKinnon. The very public discussion and handling of this conflict in Parliament, with references specifying images of ET craft and names of ET officers, but without any official comment ever being made to the implications of the data itself, was, to say the least, very curious. In 2012, Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev recorded a television appearance. Following the recording, Medvedev was filmed speaking with a journalist. Knowing that he was being filmed and recorded, the Prime Minister answered an off-the-cuff question about ET contact. His reply caught the world by surprise.
Президенту страны приносят специальную папку. На ней написано:
I will tell you this just once. Together with the suitcase of nuclear codes, the President provides the Prime Minister with a top-secret folder that is devoted entirely to the strangers who visit our planet. The report is the work of a special agency that handles the presence of aliens in our country. Each new president is given the small nuclear suitcase and 2 folders from this agency. You will find more detailed information if you watch the documentary titled Men in Black. When asked how many species we're in contact with, Medvedev replied, "I can't tell you that. It would panic people." Prime Minister Medvedev gives no appearance of joking. Neither was he debunked, disendorsed or fired by President Putin. Indeed, Dmitry Medvedev remained in office as Prime Minister for a further 8 years. Could it be that the era of silence and denial is coming to an end? Are officials as senior as Prime Ministers now part of the drip of semi-official information? In the 21st century, with an increasing flow, agencies are participating in a glasnost of information. The drip is turning into a steady stream of information. The stream has included senior Vatican spokespeople, Paul Hellyer, former Minister of Defence for Canada, and now officials for the US Navy, Dmitry Medvedev's remarks have a significant, wider context.
When Prime Minister Medvedev went on video and recorded those comments about the species that we are already in contact with at a high government level, there was no statement from President Putin to debunk what the Prime Minister had said. He didn't leap on the TV and say, oh, the Prime Minister was incapacitated, he'd had a few too many vodkas, he was only joking, he was just having a laugh. Nothing like that to put the Prime Minister's comments to one side or disendorse them. I find that rather interesting. And of course, that's only one of a number of statements from authoritative people that at the very least affirm the reality of UAP or UFO phenomena. In fact, what Prime Minister Medvedev had to say went a good deal further because it was to do with ET contact and collaboration. What Ed Mitchell has had to say goes even further than that. Let's be clear, when Ed Mitchell said at the disclosure event in 2001 that it was time for the people of planet Earth to stand up and take our place in the community of spacefaring civilizations, he was making a very strong series of statements. To spell it out, just from that one speech, he was saying, "There is no doubt we are being visited." These are his words. "We really have evidence. No, we are not alone. We are just one planet with intelligent life on it. There is an alien presence. We need to become part of this planetary community and take our proper role as a spacefaring civilization. And I call upon our government to open up like other governments have." We don't need to speculate about what Ed Mitchell and his colleagues would say if they could. That is what he was allowed to say, even while bound by layer upon layer of official secrets. And yes, it is time for disclosure. My hope is that Escaping from Eden will play its part in this process of disclosure and change.
Author and researcher Paul Wallace probes the world's ancient mythologies for clues about the origins of the human race and has published several books in the field of mysticism and spirituality. In the last decade, his work has probed the world's ancient mythologies for the insights they hold on our origins as a species and our potential as human beings. Paul's work in church ministry has included training pastors in the interpretation of biblical texts, working as a troubleshooter for communities of faith, and serving as an archdeacon in the Anglican Church in Australia. His background as a senior churchman makes it all the more surprising that Paul's latest book argues that human origins lie in our prehistoric contact with extraterrestrial species. Go to www.paulanthonywallace.com for information about Paul and his books.